Good morning. Thank you, Carol and Joanna, for inviting me today. And I also want to reiterate what Carol said. Nat Troutman and I co-curated this exhibition, and his expertise has been vital in terms of the video works and the new media works in the exhibition, and he's here today as well. I'm going to introduce you very briefly to the exhibition, Haunted Contemporary Photography Video Performance, which you'll have the opportunity to see immediately after my talk. I'm going to present the kind of briefest of overviews of the concepts underlying the exhibition, focusing on the media artworks in particular. And through this discussion, I believe you will get a sense of the significance of the various mediums within the context of this show, and specifically how the notion of obsolescence is inherent in these works and in a main kind of central feature of the exhibition. There are approximately 90 works by 60 artists in the show, and they range from individual photographs, photographic series and installations, sculptures, paintings, and drawings that incorporate photographic elements, to films and projected videos, audio pieces, and performances. The show fills the entire rotunda, as you see here, as well as two tower galleries. And in total here in New York, there are 12 works which could be categorized as new media. This issue of terminology, I think, is something that's been touched upon this morning, and I think will become increasingly important as we go on today and tomorrow. The exhibition traces the history of the incorporation of photography and recording technologies, like film and video and sound, into contemporary art since the 1960s, with a strong emphasis on video, on works of the last 10 to 20 years, in keeping with that kind of model that Chrissy identified regarding museum collecting. This trajectory, this history it's not a news story in the description of contemporary art of the past 50 years, which is defined by the notion of an expanded field in terms of media. It's a familiar terrain that we traverse in the show, but we're looking specifically at the kind of memorial quality or the memorial character of recording technologies inherent in the medium, as well as in performance, in order to propose another reading of the history of art since the 1960s. Now, whoops, I've jumped ahead of myself, but that's okay. Let's see. The premises of the show are strongly influenced by the writing on the nature of photographic representation, particularly Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida. But since, well, at least throughout the early 20th century, the photography has been seen as a particularly kind of necrophiliac medium. Its unique temporality was linked to its privileged relationship to reality, and such that the kind of morbidness of photography was discussed by writers such as André Bazin, Siegfried Kracauer, people notably who also wrote about film. But Barthes' explanation has been, or elucidation of photography has been particularly influential in describing the way that photographs seem to be haunted, that in the way that the moment of creation persists into the present. He gives the example of that kind of the visceral impact of looking at a photograph of Napoleon's brother as if you are looking into the eyes of someone who saw the emperor, that the past is so present for us in photography, and I think we can extend that to other technologies that have a moment of recording in the present that is always reiterated. Did I say a moment of recording in the past that is always reiterated in the present in a specifically an extremely kind of uncanny way, which memorializes the collective or personal traumas of the past as they are reiterated into the present. So the exhibition is organized around a series of formal and conceptual threads that play out in a set of interwoven thematic groupings which structure the show, as well as this PowerPoint presentation. The first one is appropriation and the archive, and I'm showing you here Andy Warhol's Orange Disaster #5 from 1963, which is really a touchstone of the exhibition. In his Death and Disaster series, of which this work is a part, Warhol appropriated newspaper images of public tragedies into repetitive grids that hint at both the ubiquity of this imagery as well as a kind of anxiety about its diffusion. Another touchstone is the work of Robert Rauschenberg, who was also using the silkscreen technique to create paintings in the early 60s, in 1963 specifically. These works set the chronological and thematic terms of the exhibition in the way that they appropriate personal and mass media photographs, in the repetitiousness of the imagery that speaks to the proliferation of images as well as the elusiveness of memory, in the use of media to signal at once a kind of newness as well as, its inevitable demise, which is always encompassed in any kind of technology, which has a certain kind of immediate life cycle. At its inception, it is already beginning to be passé, superseded by the next thing, which is the next device, which renders it or gives it a certain kind of melancholy, or that's the specific reading that we are focusing on in the Haunted exhibition. This is another key piece for the exhibition, Berndt and Hellebescher's water towers from their vast archive of industrial architecture, which they started to produce in the late 50s. And what we're interested in is not so much the relationship of this work to minimalism and conceptual photography, but rather the sense of it embodying a notion of historic preservation, both in terms of its disappearing subject and also through a style that refers to older forms of photography, black and white photography, and specifically new objectivity from the photographs of new objectivity from between the wars. And I'm showing you this comparison between the Bescher's work and homage to Bernd Bescher by Idris Khan, the work on the right. Idris Khan has basically scanned a whole series of, in this case, gas tanks of Bescher's, and then overlaid them as an act of homage. And this is a kind of sub-theme within the context of the show of artists not only looking back at older forms of technology and trying to hold on to them and referring to them in their work, but also looking at the work of an older generation of artists as well. And I'm going to move through because of the limited time we have today. This is an installation view of the show, which features for me on the rotunda floor, a piece by Douglas Gordon called Bootleg Empire, and I'm going to show you a rather deceptive kind of image of still shots, a group of still shots from this piece, which is a document of the actual experience of screening Andy Warhol's infamous 8-hour static film of the Empire State Building, which he has reduced to the length of a 2-hour Hollywood feature film. The image is characterized by this kind of shaky camera work. You see people walking in front of the camera. You have a sense of the transgressive nature of the act of creating essentially a bootleg. But it's also an homage as well to Warhol and acknowledges Warhol's appropriation of popular culture as well as Gordon's kind of appropriation of the popular act of piracy, you could say. Oops, kind of, it's a little too fast. What I'm showing you here is a couple of images, documentations of a performance that Sharon Hayes did here in the context of the Haunted exhibition. And what she is doing is appropriating spoken word albums from the vast archive of these, which you see behind her on the left. And it's as a means of reviving and resuscitating the historical past, and specifically a past that embodies a political protest that is at risk of being lost. At the same time, she's using the technology of the turntable, which is, as we know, also now obsolete. And again, there's this kind of attempt through the act of appropriation to revivify both the content and the technology that the work embodies. So the next sub-theme within the context of the show we've loosely titled Documentation and Reiteration. And first I'd like to just mention this piece by Christian Boltanski, who in this altar to the Schaas High School has appropriated photographs in a way. He's gathered these images. They're details from a 1931 photograph of students at a Jewish high school in Vienna, and he has created this altar sculptural form that emphasizes or suggests the possible fate of these individuals, although we don't know for certain what happened to them. The intervening history from the time these photographs were taken has leads us to have concern for their well-being. He's copied these images repeatedly, so they're multiple generations away from the originals that give us a sense of both the elusiveness of memory as well as make the individual more generic. The individuals become every man. They become, we are connected more closely with them in a way as well. Now, Boltanski is incorporating historical documents into these evocative sculptural tableau, and the portrait photograph stands in as a kind of memento mori for the loss of a person. And a large portion of the works in the show document either places that have significant kind of histories, empty spaces where the past is suggested, as well as acts. And certainly from the 1970s, when artists started creating performances, they were creating performances earlier, but obviously when this the kind of explosion that throughout the 60s and 70s in this expanded field that encompassed performances encouraged the questions of whether or not these works should be documented and how they should be documented. And sometimes the the performances were made just for the camera. Sometimes they were made for an audience. In the case of this piece by Gina Pane, a significant part of the images document the actual performance. Here you see an installation view, and in the middle of it you see Marina Abramovich's piece, this one, Cleaning the Mirror #1. Obviously Marina Abramovich is a person who has been working so actively with performance, and since 1976 she was also using video. Certainly the MoMA show would be a wonderful one to talk about as a case study today about how to present performance today. But in this particular piece, she has, it records the entire 3-hour piece where she is scrubbing clean bones, and which suggesting a kind of struggle to accept one's mortality, but it's fragmented into details, 5 individual kind of shots that you see in these stacked monitors. This is obviously a obsolete device now, these kind of square monitors, as we've turned over entirely to flat screens. But it's so important to the piece to have this kind of presentation, which it suggests a sculptural presence, and in the context of this particular piece, it is roughly the stature of a human being. It evokes a casket even, and so it's kind of unthinkable to see this piece migrate to another form. And this is a piece, a Jonas mirror piece, 1969, which is a document of a performance from '69, which is hanging in the exhibition. And we also were able, as Chrissy mentioned, let's see if it's, Jonas was able to kind of reimagine this piece in the Guggenheim space. Since the 60s, she's had a sustained engagement with performance and video, and has been especially involved with the interaction between the audience and the performer, which you can see here, and she's often used mirrors as props, which fracture the audience's experience of the piece while also bringing them into the piece. Sometimes they're very visible in the mirrors. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of that. But the photo in the collection gives you a sense of the audience's disorientation vis-a-vis the performer in this piece. And I'm interested in showing the relationship between these pieces to kind of mark out this idea of the fluidity, which Chrissy had mentioned before, the fluidity of artists selecting media, whether it's performance, whether it's a form of documentation of that performance, whether it's video that's incorporated into the performance itself or shown afterwards. What you're seeing here is an installation view partly into a kind of darkened space for the projected piece on the left, and then you also see the gallery on the right. Both of these are works by Christian Marclay. And this piece, in a way, documents a performance. It's you see the operator of this stylus moving it in order to find the lyric of love in various 45s. There's a wonderful show at the Whitney right now, which gives you a full sense of the scope of Christian's work, which is always engaged with music, both how it's produced and how it's represented visually. And at the same time, he's engaged not only with the obsolescence of the technologies that produce sound, but also the forms of visualization. And as an example, you see on the right a cyanotype that he's made, a cyanotype being an 19th century technology or technique of making a photogram, a direct image. In this case, he's pulled the tape out of cassette tapes and strewn it about on this light-sensitive surface. And so the white part is the tape, the tape that covers the surface, and the blue is the exposed part. So he's using an obsolete technology of the cassette tape to create an image through a technique of visualization that is also, in essence, obsolete, to make these mementos, as he calls them. This is a part of Tacita Dean's piece in the exhibition, and I have a number of views. It encompasses the entire top ramp of the museum, which is darkened in order to allow you to see this piece, which consists of 6 projections, 6 16-millimeter projectors playing films that always show Merce Cunningham at life size. It is, as the title you can read here, it is a representation of Merce Cunningham performing John Cage's famous piece, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which consists essentially of the performer remaining almost inactive, so that the experiences of the ambient sounds, the random sounds in the space. And in this installation, in Tacita Dean's installation, you have kind of a doubling of that effect, in that you hear the ambient sounds of the cars outside of the studio that he's in. At the same time, as you walk through the space and become a part of the piece, you hear the sound of the film projectors, which is at this point in time a very dated or kind of experience. Not everyone is familiar, young people are not even familiar with a projector like this. And so these projectors are, in fact, obviously central to the piece. Now, Tacita Dean has made a series of portraits of elderly people at the end of their life. They're homages and a way to kind of preserve them, hold on to them as they age. And she has also tried through her work has preserved dying technologies, specifically film. She's recorded, the last film factory in France using stock from that film, and so she's very committed to holding on to this technology and the sense of the experience that we have specifically with this technology that's one at risk of being lost. The next section is entitled Landscape Architecture in the Passage of Time, and it is dedicated to images that record sites both indoors and out where significant, often traumatic events have happened, usually of a collective nature, such as war. We see traces of the past and pieces like this one by Sally Mann, who uses old cameras to create an image that looks dated, that confounds temporality. It's made today, it looks like it's of the past. It suggests the landscape is immutable, but it also, as an image, is linked with the Civil War past. These are two photographs by Anne Millet, who documents Vietnam War reenactors, in the process questioning the way Vietnam has been represented in our collective imaginations. She's using black and white, which has traditionally been the medium of truth-telling, of the verite. That's now superseded as black and white is, rather than being less expensive, it would be more expensive or impossible to produce, or at least on film. So it's an interesting kind of patently untrue scenario, which is resonates with a visual history of black and white specifically. Here's a space, handcrafted space by James Casevier. Again, a sense of how an empty space visualizes the passage of time. Also a kind of homage in that it's a recreated space of a Richard Neutra garage, suggesting a certain kind of failure of modernism, perhaps. And this is a piece by Janina Cepa called Lacrima Corpus, which could be translated as tear body, a close-up of the image. And as many of the pieces, like the one by Jim Casevier, suggests a kind of stage on which something has happened and is no longer there. They seem to be kind of haunted by the past. In this case, a figure occurs in the space. It is kind of a literal stage. It is a site that is haunted by a particular history. In this case, it was this castle in which the piece was shot was Goethe's summer residence, but it also overlooks, or is near Buchenwald, the concentration camp. There's a musical accompaniment to the piece. It's kind of 18th century music, and the piece, the dancer in the middle seems to be, it seems to create almost a jewel box, the look of a jewel box with a little dancer in it. And I'm just showing you this installation of a photograph and a couple of light boxes by Jeff Wall. These are details of the light boxes to give you this sense of this notion of this document being haunted by the past, by whoever left this tin of peas and sauce, or the suitcase's absent owner. The works in this part of the show trace an absent human being, whether it's through performance documentation or remnants of the body in a landscape, or acts that were enacted at one moment that is now gone. The last section that I'm going to talk about, we've called trauma and the uncanny, and there's an installation view, as well as this is a piece by Gillian Waring. It's from a series of photographs she made that appropriate family photographs, and what she's, in this case, it's a photograph of herself at 3, but she's had a prosthetic mask made, and she is wearing it. She's performing for the camera. The works in this section feature the recurrence of traumatic memories from the past, specifically often childhood memories, and include doppelgangers and doubles of ghostly figures from the past. This is a reference to Freud's notion of the uncanny, which is a specific one in which doubles and doppelgangers are figurations of past memories. And my red light is flashing, so I'm going to try and finish up quickly. Thank you. Freud tried to explain how experiences from the past can recur in the present, perhaps in a different form. Sometimes this notion could be linked to the temporality of photography, in the sense that it's something that recurs from the past and is probably not understood at the time, but then is very present today. In the case of wearing, you have this sense of the adult's eyes peering through the child's mask and a kind of recurrence of trauma. This is a little bit out of sequence. This is a video by Anthony Goicolea, which seems to present a desperately anxious camper. And I'm just going to zip through here. This will be the last piece I'll discuss. These are a number of shots from the piece called Der Sandman by Stan Douglas. This was a piece that was filmed in Berlin, in the old Potsdam studios, film studios. It consists of he created two sets, one from the 70s and one from the 90s, kind of pre and post the unification of Germany. And he's recorded the set in 360 degrees, and as you have to see it really to understand that the projections are intersecting with the kind of 70s and 90s set. And you see a man who, in this piece, who is, and there's a voiceover as well, where you hear different people reading texts from E.T.A. Hoffmann's story of Der Sandman, which Freud has very significantly includes in his essay called The Uncanny, the Sandman being a demonic figure who scares children and may represent kind of paternal repression. But it's that kind of confused temporality that is expressed in this piece, both in the texts that Stan Douglas has chosen, which are about this kind of split temporality, like the temporality of post-traumatic stress, where the person who is experiencing it feels it as if it is real in the present, even though it's from the past. They're haunted by that, and so both in terms of the text and in terms of the visual image, where you have these two time periods, pre and post, around a social and political trauma. They're represented in the image as well, and through the technology, which in this case is 16 millimeter film, two 16 millimeter film projections. They're all overlapping, and Stan Douglas is also kind of rewriting both, or re-envisioning both the film history and the narrative or textual history by having the figure of a dark-skinned man central in the piece. So I think I had better stop there, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you.